This happened when I was driving north of Kyoto, and I had a couple of friends in the car with me. It was late, a little after 1 a.m. I think. My friends and I would often go on these night excursions. We just went wherever. We usually ended up in the middle of nowhere, but thank God for GPS, hey? We were driving through a pretty quiet area, and there were a lot of distance between the houses that we passed. It was a dark night in late autumn. There was a red light up ahead, and the car in front slowed to a stop. And I did too. I was looking ahead, and I noticed something about the car. The trunk looked like it was open a little. I looked closer and I realized that it was. It wasn't really my issue, so I started to look away, but just as I did, something unexpected happened. A man wearing pajamas rolled out of the trunk and onto the road before the light changed to green. He was a slim middle-aged man, by the look of it, and his hands were tied behind his back, and he had a gag in his mouth. It was very shocking to see. He rose to his feet, wobbled a little, and then started to walk unsteadily towards my car. He looked utterly terrified. His eyes were dark with fear, and his face was a twisted plea of desperation. He was on the verge of tears. No, I'll never forget that. You can't forget seeing something like that. His eyes locked with mine and passed over my friends in the car. We were stunned into silence. The driver's side and the passenger side doors of the car in front opened, and 2 men emerged from the car. They walked towards the man from the trunk. They quickly and easily caught him. The driver then pulled something out of his pocket. It was a gun. He struck the man, and the other man caught him before he fell to the ground. It was raining that night, and all the windows of the car were shut, but we could hear the sound of the butt of that gun connecting with the man in the pajamas' head. It made a sickening crack. The 2 men then returned the man to where he crawled out from, the trunk. They slammed it shut, looked over their shoulders at us very quickly, and then returned to their car. The light turned green, and they stepped on it. We were stunned, and we just sat in the car wide-eyed and stared ahead at the now open road. Then a car from behind's horn jolted us back to reality. We drove ahead and pulled over to call the police. I was told to wait where I was for an officer to arrive. It took about 10 minutes, and during that time my friends and I were pretty much silent. We had nothing to say. We all told the officer when he arrived about what happened. He asked me to go with him to the police station, and I was more than happy to help in any capacity I could. I was interviewed there for about an hour. Over the next few days and weeks, I religiously watched the news, expecting to hear something about that night, but I never heard anything. What happened seemed so unrealistic. It was like a scene from a film. I would question my recollection if it wasn't for my friends being in the car with me when it happened. I was young at the time, and I think seeing this incident was the first time I realized that the so-called dark side of the world really does exist. This happened when I was in university, when I was driving home from a trip. The roads were really dark as I was in the countryside. The mountains and trees were blotting out the moonlight. All of a sudden, my engine began to splutter and slow until it eventually came to a stop. I'm not the best with cars, so rather than waste any time with guesswork, I figured I'd call roadside rescue. I had that as part of my insurance. There was nothing much I could do except wait for someone to arrive. It was creepy out there. The forests are home to strange noises at night. After a little while, a bright light lit up the road and it was aimed at my car. I thought that roadside rescue were early. I couldn't believe my luck. But when the light got closer, I realized that it wasn't them. It was strange. It didn't look like the light of normal headlights. It stopped about 50 meters in front of my car and didn't move. It was getting a bit weird now. Unlike standard headlights, which are divided into 2 light sources, whatever was in front of me had only the one source of light. That light was so bright it didn't seem safe at all. It seemed not to have the same purpose as a light bulb. I didn't like it. And then I saw them, 3 people, approaching from behind the light. These were very thin and very tall, pushing 2 meters, I'd say, 6'6". As they moved from behind the light to in front of it, I could see the lines in their face. Their faces were really gaunt and long. There was something off-putting about these 3 people that I couldn't quite put my finger on at first, but then I realized what it was. Their style of clothes and hair, etc. They looked like they were from another time period. It was like they had been wearing the same clothes since the 70s. They were wearing chinos, polo shirts, stuff like that. They approached my car and one of them spoke to me. Once again I noticed there was something slightly off-putting about these people. When they spoke, it had all the wrong intonations. Like he was emphasizing the wrong syllables. I'm not quite sure how to explain it, but it just wasn't right. It made listening to them difficult. Yet I detected no accent to indicate that they were foreign. "Where did you come from?" he asked. I chose to remain silent before answering that. I didn't want to let these strangers know about my car's engine trouble, because essentially, I couldn't get away from them. "You have a trouble with your car and I can fix it," he said. It scared me that he knew that. I said thanks but no thanks. I had already called roadside rescue. The man was persistent. I kept refusing. I really didn't want to speak to these guys out here in the woods alone. Then the strangest thing happened. My thoughts felt like they were changing. Like I had to mentally wrestle with myself not to allow them to work on my car. It felt like my mind was being changed for me. I started to wonder if maybe they could help. Maybe it would be a good idea to unlock the door and let them in. I got out of my car, half of my mind screaming at the other half, imploring me to get back into my car and get the doors locked again. I couldn't fight it. I started following them towards the light. I was completely transfixed. I didn't need to think for myself. I tried to raise my arm, but I couldn't because I wasn't in control of it. I wanted to be scared, but this calm voice inside my head reassured me that there was nothing to fear. That part of me was still screaming to do anything I could to get away from these men, but that internal voice of mine was getting quieter and quieter. While I was walking towards that bright light, my phone started to ring. It must be the roadside rescue people. It snapped me back to reality. I was in control again. I was able to answer the phone. I was back. I knew that that phone needed to be on. Something about that call saved me. I must have explained my location in about 10 different ways to the rescue people. I really wanted to be accurate. I didn't want to be out here anymore. Whilst I was on the phone, the men were trying to get me to take up their offer of help. I hated the way they towered over me. In their faces, they were so pale and thin, like barn owls. I refused. I had to. I ran back to my car with my phone clamped to the side of my head. And that was when they began to get angry. They were screaming and shouting by the side of my door. I began to doubt myself. Usually I would never refuse a kind favor, as I would be willing to do the same for someone in my situation, but given what just happened, I knew I couldn't trust these men. They were trying to express anger, but it was like the concept was entirely new to them. Eventually they gave up and headed back towards the beam of light. Before leaving, they did this weird thing simultaneously in front of my car. They placed an open palm on their foreheads and then slapped it. It's like as if you're doing a high five to your own head. Their fingers were long and spider-like. I don't have a clue what that gesture is supposed to mean. The light then shot backwards at tremendous speed and it was gone. Shortly after, the roadside rescue team showed up. The guy went to check the engine and couldn't find a single fault with it. He put my keys back in the ignition, turned it, and my engine started without issue. That really freaks me out because I know that my engine stopped. I hated it, but I needed to get out of the woods. I headed in the direction the light shot off in and managed to get home without any further incident. However, when I woke up the next day, I had a really strange rash all over my body. I went to see a dermatologist and he couldn't figure out the cause of the rash. I think the rash went away after 10 days or so with the cream and ointment I got from the dermatologist. I'm sure that rash was related to the bright light and those 3 men. Well, I say men, I'm not entirely convinced of that fact. About 2 years after this happened, I was at a party and a woman said that when she was driving out in the mountains in the same area that I was with her boyfriend, they said they saw something similar to what I did. She said on 2 occasions she saw beams of light flying across the night sky. Some people snickered at that, but I didn't. It felt all too real. Did we have some sort of encounter with a UFO? It must be really hard to believe this, but I wish I could just give you my memories or my mind for a while. The fear those 3 tall men instilled in me was otherworldly. That said, I don't know why my mind changed to trusting them like a light switch being switched on and off. It lingers in my thoughts often. It was truly disturbing. I was driving when it happened. It made the local news, so I want to keep names and locations out of it. I was with my wife. We were heading off for a summer camping trip. The night was full of the sound of crickets and cicadas, and there was a fair degree of humidity in the air. We were going up through the mountainous woods, and despite it being the height of summer, it was dark out in the shade of the giant rocks. To be honest, it was our first trip away as a married couple after the honeymoon. I mean, we did tons of family stuff, and thank yous to friends, but it was just nice to do something alone, just us. And to be frank, I was more than looking forward to that idea. While passing along a bridge, my wife shouted out, "Someone just jumped in the river!" I pulled over and looked in the direction she was pointing. We got out and had a look around. I noticed that there was a bicycle leaning against the railings, and there was a pair of shoes neatly positioned facing the water. What the hell were they doing? Night swimming? Or something much more fatal, perhaps? When I got close to the guard railing at the edge of the road, I realized how high up the bridge was. There must have been a 20 to 30-foot drop below. Excitement surrounding our trip disappeared into the night air, as now there was a grave situation in front of us. The authorities needed to be notified. It was a big fuss. The police and the fire department turned up in a hurry to search the river. We were told that we weren't allowed to leave until the police had conducted their investigation. We were being detained. I started to think that we were being treated more like suspects than witnesses. I was so bored of sitting by the side of the road waiting for it all to be over. Sorry if that sounds selfish, I was just really looking forward to my trip. A few hours passed and someone reported that they had discovered the body downstream in the river. He didn't make it. That was obvious. After witnessing that poor person's final moments and being questioned for hours, we were finally free, but that night's incidences left us both depressed and disheartened. When we got to our destination, we wanted nothing more than just some shut-eye, so we headed to bed. The next morning, I had a little Google to see if there were any further details announced regarding the man on the bridge. I couldn't find much, but later the police called. I learned something shocking through my conversation with the detective. He suspected that the shoes were placed there intentionally, and not by the man who jumped. He asked my wife and I if we saw anyone else in the area when we approached. I didn't see anyone, and my wife said she didn't see anyone either. I asked why it was important, and he said that the reason why it was so important was because the man who had supposedly jumped had been dead for at least a week before his body was anywhere near that bridge. We were floored by that. It wasn't a suicide, but a murder. Then I remembered the bicycle which was resting against the guardrail. Perhaps the person who tossed that body into the river was in the same area we were in while we were calling the police. They could have been watching us. Or was the bicycle part of staging the scene? What if we didn't call the police? Would we have been in danger that night? Come to think of it, I wasn't able to recall if the bike remained there until we left. Perhaps before the police came, somebody used it to hightail it out of there. Of course, there are various interpretations of what happened that night, but the fact remains, it's a night we can never forget. This one is a bit of an urban legend in my town that I think you might get a kick out of. It's a good one to tell around the campfire. It's set in Okinawa. It's about my friend, let's call him K. He was a pretty crazy kid when he was younger, but I met him when he was about 18. I had just gotten my driver's license, and he was always trying to convince our gang of friends to go on road trips. He always wanted to go in search of ghosts, or to any haunted locations he could. For example, he was known to go into abandoned air raid shelters alone at night. I thought that it was just a rumor that there were still skeletons in the air raid shelters from the war, but there was truth to the claims. This didn't deter him. I remember that some kids at school said that if you took a photo in a certain air raid shelter at 2 a.m., then you would see a spirit in the photo. Others said that if you went swimming at 2 a.m. around the island and had someone take a photo of you, you would see the arms and grasping fingers of those who met their end in the watery depths, reaching for you. If you aren't convinced, you need only remember the history surrounding Okinawa and the war. Of course, no one ever had any evidence of these photos to back up the claims, but it was spooky and mildly interesting nonetheless. Kay wasn't scared of anything, and we all admired his guts and spirit. One night we piled into my car, just like usual, only we brought along an acquaintance. He was, how can I say, a bit of trouble. That night we were heading to an off-limits wharf he knew about. Seriously, I don't know how I let myself get talked into these situations. We had a kind of mini convoy, 2 cars were following mine. The plan was to be close to the water to let off some fireworks, and those who could drink would, while at least 3 of us were left with the soft drinks. I had my doubts, to be honest, but it was fun. It was one of those summer nights you feel that you'd never forget. That thought couldn't have been truer, considering the aftermath. Since it was dark by the wharf, we aimed our cars towards the water's edge to make sure we had enough light. When I say wharf, I don't mean some port filled with boats. This seemed to be someone's private mini port, and the best thing about it was there were no boats there. It was really nice. The headlights were working well, everyone was in good spirits, and someone started shouting about someone being in the water. We all turned to look, and to my surprise, there were 5 or 6 people in the water. One looked like it could be a child. Some of the guys said that they couldn't see what we were talking about, but to me it was plain to see. We panicked, as you might have in this situation. There was uproar, and then someone shouted that we should go to a nearby house to see if they had a rope or something. It was mayhem in those moments. We were shouting out to the water and shouting at each other. We were just teenagers with no knowledge of how we could help. No experience. During these moments of chaos, an old man stumbled his way over from a house nearby. "What are you doing here? This is off limits!" he roared at us. He made us feel like little kids. Turns out he was a fisherman. One of my pals was stripping off to jump into the water to try and help. The old man clamped onto his wrist and yanked his arm backward. My friend then wrestled to break free from his grasp, shouting all the while, completely transfixed, "They're drowning, even the little one, I have to try and save them." The old man commanded him to stop. It was so weird because half of the people were still asking us what we were screaming about. The old fisherman's voice cut through the summer night sky. "Can't you see?" he boomed, and that silenced the lot of us. Of course I could see. The poor people drowning in the water were right before my eyes. He restrained my friend the moment as his toe reached the wharf's edge and said, "Do they look like they're asking for help?" It dawned on me that no one had heard screams for help from the water, just the panic from us at the shore. We stood in silence, watching the waves, and those that could see them in the water were unable to look away. "Look closely, boys. They aren't screaming, are they?" No, they weren't. "Nope. They're smiling. Yep. Sometimes laughing too. See, people like you go where you shouldn't, get drawn in. They're looking for company. They want you in there. So we keep it off limits. Boys, I don't want to see you around here again, okay?" All of us left without a word of complaint, never to return. Those smiling, drowning faces. That was too much. This happened about 4 years ago, when I was in college. Back then, I didn't really care about credits or attendance, really. I was enjoying the college life a little too much. My university was out in the middle of the countryside, which meant that there wasn't all that much to do at night. So I would often go on road trips and night drives with 3 regular friends. It was a warm summer night, and we were being idiots like we usually did. My friend was clinging to the roof of the car while I drove. He wanted to see how long he could hold on for. I saw Jackie Chan do it, and I thought it would be really cool if we could do it. This should go without saying, but please don't try this. It's really stupid, and he could have died. So, he was on the roof, and one of my friends shouted out of the window that we had hit 40 kilometers an hour, which is about 25 miles per hour. "That's enough, stop, I'm gonna fall," he said. "You give up? I'll show you no mercy," I said. I started to slow down a little. I wasn't a monster, I was just kidding. "Stop the car, man, I'm really gonna..." Then I heard a dull thud on the road behind. I felt an instant sense of dread rise from the pit of my stomach. I called out to my friend, and I didn't get a response. I looked in the rearview mirror and saw my friend was lying there in the road. I pulled over and ran over to him. Fortunately, because I had slowed down, he didn't seem that injured. The only thing is that he broke his watch. I asked him what happened, and if he lost his grip. He said that he didn't lose his grip. He was distracted by something, and he just pointed towards the moon. "It's just the moon, you dumbass," I said. "Look closer, you dumbass," he said. When I looked closer, I could see something flying through the air. It was glowing purple. Was this a UFO? It was a flying object I had never seen before, so that's what it felt like. I stood there dumbstruck, staring at the purple flying object. It was really bright. We had driven up to this observation area in the mountains, usually popular in the day, but quiet at nighttime. I experienced a different kind of fear that day. Sure, I have been scared by horror films and the thought of a home invader or something, but I had never been so deeply chilled by the presence of something so incomprehensible, so inconceivable. I think that all 4 of us were experiencing this new sense of terror. We were literally shaking. That flying object, it was shimmering. It seemed to have an ability to teleport. It had now moved closer to the summit of the mountain. Closer to where we were. "We have to check this out, guys," one of my friends said. About that guy. He was 22, a self-proclaimed stud despite being a virgin. How the hell did this guy become the most confident in our little friend group all of a sudden? My fear was overpowered by my curiosity. I mean, it was a once-in-a-lifetime experience. I had to go, and through the power of convincing, my other 2 friends gave us the okay sign. We drove towards this shimmering object, full of a mix of fear and excitement. I remember clearly that one of my friends said the light must be coming from some sort of construction lamp nearby. The instant my friend said that, we heard a terribly loud noise coming from the direction of the light. It was hurting my ears. My friend asked me to pull over. He looked as if he was about to cry. Before I stopped the car, I felt like I hit something and ran it over. We were all visibly in pain, and now curiosity gave way to panic. We were sweating profusely. I could see it teeming off our brows. I had to get out and check the damage to the car. My dad made me keep a flashlight in the glove box. I still do to this day. There was no damage to the car. Off in the distance, we heard that crushing sound. It sounded like the snapping of giant trees. It was monstrous. I just wanted to get in the car and get away. We couldn't stop the ringing in our ears. It was really scary. I shouted to everyone to get back in the car. The shining object in the sky was moving again. It was descending the mountain in a straight line. It was approaching our direction with some speed. I felt like this couldn't possibly be happening. I shouted at them to hurry up and get in the car, and once we were all in, I sped away from the light. I must have broken some speed rules that night. Maybe I was channeling my inner Jackie Chan, who knows. Everyone was silent in the car. We went to a convenience store at the bottom of the mountain. It for some reason felt safe there. The shining purple UFO thing seemed to hover in place where I thought I hit something, and then we watched as the light slowly faded into the dark. I have no idea what the hell happened that night, but it felt like something otherworldly. We told our friends about that night, and unsurprisingly, no one believed us. What was that thing in the sky? A new government-tested aircraft? A UFO? I guess we'll never know. Whatever it was, only the four of us saw it.